longing on a large scale is what makes history. The new system is emerging everywhere. You can see it, the new economy, the new way of doing things. Climate change demands that we reimagine everything, and we don't have very long to do it.
Good evening and welcome everyone. It's quite an honor to see so many people in this room. I must admit we might be a bit overbooked, so I really hope we can make ourselves comfortable still. So are there some people still that don't have any seat that would need to be seated? We have a few more of these like it's these seats, but yeah, I hope we can watch for each other and make ourselves comfortable. Great. Welcome to our fourth post-growth fireside chat, and tonight on the topic of the power of imagination. And tonight we have a very special guest with us, Rob Hopkins, that you might already know for some of you. And so really, really honored to have you here. And I will properly introduce you afterwards, but before we do that, I'd like to get a bit of a sense of who is in this room tonight. And so I'll just ask a few questions, and if you feel recognized, you can just raise your hand. And my first question is, who of you did not know of Rob Hopkins before seeing this event? And there is absolutely no judgment here, but just, okay, quite a few. Great. Do we have some people that haven't been at a Fireside Chat before or a One Planet Lab event? Also interesting. Okay, welcome, quite a few. So I realized I haven't introduced myself. My name is Lorraine Descamps. I am co-leading, or have the honor to co-shape the One Planet Lab, which is an initiative by the WWF Switzerland, where we are here today. So also welcome in the WWF office. And maybe question here, who of you haven't heard about the One Planet Lab before? And it's the last time I ask you to raise your hand. Okay, a few. So the very quick pitch, the One Planet Lab, we like to see each other as a think and do tank, where we explore how an economy and society within planetary boundaries can function, but also respecting the social foundation. So we will be talking also more about these frameworks tonight, and basically concretely what we do. So on one hand, we create and share knowledge by publishing white papers or organizing these kind of events. Then we create synergies, so we have a network of 120 partners that we bring together in partner events, in workshops, and we try to push certain topics together. And then we want to test, so we have some pilot projects that we support, that we co-create. And actually there has been a call for new pilot projects around Switzerland that has been launched, and you can submit if you have a project in the areas of post-growth, sufficiency, etc., your idea until end of March. So feel free to approach me later on, and also at the apéro I'm happy to share more about what we do. And now I would warmly like to introduce Rob Hopkins. I wanted to say to invite you on stage, but you're already here, so that's great. And Rob, so I'd like a hand of applause because he came from England, and I'm really happy. I think at this point of the conversation, we can even sit down and start the fireside chat mode. But so Rob, you are a real pioneer when it comes to crafting a more sustainable world. You are the co-founder of the Transition Town movement that is around the world. You're a permaculture educator, a writer, an activist, an experienced time traveler. And you have been a true inspiration to me and probably many of you also here in the room for the past 10 years, because I know you since 10 years. So thank you again for being here. And regarding the format, so as you can see, we have a fireside chat. And the idea, we could also, if we put it into context, it could be also a pub night or whatever you prefer. But the idea of our fireside chats is really to have this open, informal, also blunt conversation on the topic of post-growth. And tonight our focus is, of course, on the power of imagination to reach this vision. And I have prepared a few questions, but of course I'm very happy if the conversation moves along like the flow and the fire we have tonight. And to be very honest, it has been really difficult because I have about hundreds of questions I would like to ask you. So I'll make it more easy for me. I will also open up the floor for questions from the audience. So we will have a first start into a conversation and we will move it also to the audience. So feel free to keep them in mind. And afterwards we will have a closing and of course an apéro where we continue these conversations. As a quick remark, logistically, so we have a tech team, as you might have seen. So this event is recorded. If you don't want your question to appear in the recording, please let me know. If you don't want to appear on any images, same, you can approach me or a person from the team. I don't know where Sandra is. Yeah, okay. Or you can approach me and we will make sure that it happens this way. Great. So first of all, Rob, we would like to get to know you a little more and make sure that everyone in this room is on the same page. And my first question is this one. And of course, if you feel you want to add more to your description, also feel free to do so. Yeah. So I first got to know you, like many other French-speaking people, in a movie called Demain, Tomorrow, realized by the producer Cyril Dion, where your appearance really made me curious and really stroked me because there was something different about it. And if I remember well, there was a passage where you said, if instead of putting a lot of energy in big campaigns, protests, we would put it in creating this other world, it could be actually a quiet revolution. And on the same note, in your book, From What Is to What If, that I really liked, you mentioned that at the start of the transition town movement, there was this belief, if we wait for governments, it will be too late. If we act as individuals, it will be too little. But if we act as communities, it might be just enough and it might be in time. So basically your belief is if people get jointly active in creating this new world, we can make it. And now I'm very curious, 10 years later, or even 20 years later, after the creation of the movement, do you still see it this way?
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is just really, really lovely. I'm very touched to see so many people here. Yeah, Demain was a really kind of a life-changing thing for me. I knew Cyril Dion already because he was involved with the Colibri movement. And he'd been to my town, I think, once to sort of find out more about what we were doing. And then he said, "Oh, I'm making a film. Could we come and film an interview?" So he came with Mélanie Laurent, who I didn't know who Mélanie Laurent was. I'd never heard of her, and she just was wearing like jeans and a sort of like a hoodie top. Like she didn't look like a film star, you know. And the crew was saying, "She's very famous in France. She's very, very famous." And I didn't know who she was at all. And so they were with us for like an hour, and they just filmed an interview, and then they went. And then a year and a half later, I got invited to Paris to UGC Normandy on the Champs-Élysées, I was telling you earlier, to the premiere, and there was 1,400 people in the cinema. It was packed. And they showed this film, and it made me cry, I think, at least 4 times. And then it was during COP21, so I was there for the next 2 weeks. I went to another 4 screenings of it, because they asked me to go and be like part of a panel afterwards, you know. And what amazed me was that in every one of those screenings, more than half the audience were under 25. And in England, if you show a film about climate change, there's a lot of grey hair in the cinema. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know what I mean? But this was like, wow, this is really interesting. And after the 4th one I went to, this group of young people came to me and they said, "Rob, we love this. We love this." And I said, "Why? What is it that resonates about it?" And they said, because this was like a month after the Bataclan attacks in Paris. They said after that happened, they said, we didn't know what our story was anymore. Like, what's the point? What's France for? What are we all doing here? And now we have a story. And they, like in France, they call them Generation Demain. No, the kids who grew up with that film. And I meet them now, like 10 years later, working in all sorts of different places, and they still have the kind of fire in them from that film. I've never... Like, it's kind of hard to imagine another film doing that. Like it showed in boardrooms for months. It was showed in mainstream cinemas for months. They made a follow-up called Après-Demain, which you can find on YouTube, which tells the story. And I remember there was one place where they said they had a screening in the town, in the cinema, and then afterwards nobody wanted to go home. And they all stayed in the car park for like 3 hours. They had like a people's assembly in the car park, and they can now trace lots of projects back to that evening when that happened. And when I sometimes I go to events with Cyril as well. And last year, him and I met him for a drink in Paris. It's amazing if you spend time with Cyril Dion wherever you are. People, every 2 or 3 minutes, someone will come up and just say, Cyril, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you. Demand changed my life. Thank you. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I just want to, it's like, whew. And he's like, yes, it happens all the time. It's like, wow, what a gift. What an amazing, amazing, amazing thing. So to answer your actual question, yes, I do. I still feel, I guess where I feel now was when I was in Demain. You know, like you said, the idea of transition was, if we try and do this as individuals, it'll be too little. If we wait for governments, it'll be too late. If we try and do this on our own, if we try and do this with the people around us, it might just be enough. I think that the way I would slightly change that, actually, is I would say, if we do this with the people around us, and with municipalities, and with local social enterprises, and if we build strong coalitions in the places where we are, then we can do things. Like the things that give me the most inspiration that I visit around Europe are places where community groups and municipalities and other local organizations find new ways to work together. That's kind of I don't have that much faith that national governments are going to do this. They're too corrupted, they're too, although actually in the UK in the last year, I would sort of revise that slightly because since Mamdani was elected in New York, and in the UK now the Green Party, which was always quite small, last year elected this fantastic young gay Jewish guy called Zach Polanski, who is awesome, and I love him. And I met him in the summer, and I gave him a copy of How to Fall in Love with the Future. And he's running on this platform of this slogan of "Make Hope Normal Again." And the membership of that party has gone from 50,000 to 215,000, and all the narrative in the UK has all been, well, of course Nigel Farage is going to win the next election. If that happens, Zurich, save me somewhere to come and live, because I'll be coming. But actually, it's like that's always been presented as like some kind of inevitable story, right? And actually, there was an election 2 weeks ago, a local election. And everyone's like, well, Nigel Farage is going to win it. The Greens won it by 4,000 votes with a young woman who was from that area who was a plumber. And people, I think we're kind of at a point now where people are desperate for something that is genuinely different, that isn't fascism, and that isn't, and that, I sometimes I go to Paris. There's a place called HEC in Paris, and which is like the business school in Paris, right? And I go there once a year. They let me through the doors. It's quite amazing. And this young guy said, we did questions at the end. This guy said, what should I say to my friends who say, well, fascism is the only answer? It's like, well, you tell him that's rubbish. What do you mean? What's the alternative to fascism? That was the question. I said, not fascism. It didn't seem like a very difficult question to me, but he seemed to be struggling with it. So I've gone all over the place there, haven't I? But yeah, so for me, I still have a lot of faith that communities are capable of extraordinary things. But I think also, so Transition Network was part of, so the European Union created this thing called the Climate Pact, which is like its kind of supposedly kind of ambitious climate thing. And Transition Network was one of the organizations who could comment on that. And we said, this is brilliant, but you're not going to get anywhere unless communities are part of this. You can't do this top down. You have to do it in a way that communities play a really active role in it. And you cannot expect that they're all going to do that on a Wednesday evening once they've got the kids to bed after work. You know, you have to resource this properly. Communities can do amazing things, but they need funding, they need some support, they need some infrastructure. And in the transition movement, we see again and again, when community groups even get a relatively small amount of funding, they do amazing things with it. But if a while ago, I was in the last time I flew, which was a long time ago, and I was in America, and I was at this place in Richmond, California, with this amazing woman called Daria Robinson, who runs this project called Urban Tilth, who in this very poor, mostly black neighborhood, teaching young people to grow food to become urban market gardeners. They do a big market gardening scheme there. And she's been doing it for years. And I said, we have to, we can't expect this all to happen with volunteers. We have to be creating paid work for people. Transition should be becoming one of the biggest employers in the towns where it happens. She said, it's so good to hear you say that, because if this is a revolution that depends on volunteers, I can't be part of it. And no one in Richmond can be part of it. And we're just going to end up with a completely white middle class movement that's not as inclusive as it could be. So the best things that I see are where transition groups are able to think about the work they need to do in a way that's about creating jobs. And in my town, where we've been doing transition for nearly 20 years now, we have a project that's taken a long time to happen, but it's happening, where the community is becoming its own housing developer. And we're building 39 homes, truly affordable homes, very energy efficient, ecological homes for local people in community ownership forever. And that's creating a lot of jobs for people. And so that's transition at its best, is like you're addressing local needs and doing transition at the same time.
Great, thank you. You have already touched.
I've already answered all the questions in one.
We're done. No, I think it's great. It's a teaser for many topics we will deep dive into. I think it's really interesting to understand where you put hope for now in the transition, and the example of England or Mamdani is definitely a thing. But also knowing that, we won't manage to solve the crisis with unpaid work. So also deep diving into this topic, as we will also talk about post-growth. Maybe now, for the people that haven't heard about you before, it would be interesting to hear a bit more about what the transition town movement is, where it came from, and how you feel also about having created this. Maybe you also have a recipe to share how it has spread around the world, and also maybe giving us some insights about how it is in Switzerland.
So transition started in my town, which is a town in the southwest of England called Totnes, which is about 9,000 people population. And it was really just a few of us who met and had an inquiry at that time, it was actually a very similar time to now, in that we had oil crises. You could really see how our vulnerability how our dependency on fossil fuels was a real vulnerability. We had just had a thing in the UK where all the lorry drivers went on strike, and it became very clear that after 3 days our supermarkets were running out of food. They only had 3 days worth of food in them, and all the kind of local resilient food systems that would have sustained us before had all gone. And it was like, okay, this is not very good. And we realized we had to break our dependency on fossil fuels for lots of reasons. And it was a few of us who came together motivated by that. I had been a permaculture teacher before, and I guess I'd become slightly disillusioned with the permaculture movement at that time, because it felt for me like permaculture principles were the tools we needed to build a post-carbon society. But most of the people I knew in the permaculture movement were actually really quite happy living in the middle of the countryside making chairs out of sticks. And I was like, this is like, come on. So transition was like a Trojan horse. So we could put permaculture in it. Permaculture is a very difficult thing to explain to someone in the pub. Well, what's permaculture, Rob? Okay. And you have to draw pictures. Any permaculture teachers here? It takes a while, and so the idea with transition was, well, maybe we could make like a Trojan horse, and we could put permaculture in it and Joanna Macy's work in it, and so you could just wheel it past, and people would say, oh yeah, it's transition. That was kind of the idea, really. And we were just trying to do it in my town. That was the idea. What could we do something that would make a difference in this town? And we just started this thing, and at the time it was really, the internet was quite a new thing then. So I had like a blog that I did, and we had a wiki page. YouTube was kind of quite a new thing, really. I'm sure none of you can imagine such a time in distant. It was just after the dinosaurs, and just before the pyramids were built, and so we were kind of. It was just an experiment, really. But then really quickly we started to get people from other places saying, can we do that too? And what are you doing, actually? And I remember there was a day when somebody showed me on YouTube, but there was no books published at that time. Someone showed me a video on YouTube of a woman in New Zealand in a village giving a presentation to her community about why they should become a transition town. It's like, this is really interesting. None of us had spoken to this person. How did she know all this stuff? It's like, this is amazing. We started getting emails from like Ulaanbaatar and Iran and Brazil, and people saying, we've started a transition town. What's happening here? It was just mad. And so 6 months after we started doing transition in Totnes, we had to start Transition Network because the team who were trying to do transition in our town was still doing it, but we couldn't cope with all these interests from all over the place. So we started Transition Network to support that. So yeah, this year is the 20th anniversary of transition starting, which makes me feel very, very old. But it's been an amazing. Someone once called transition hope with its sleeves rolled up, which I really, really liked. Like, it's about what can you do in the place that you are, with the people that you have, the resources that you have, with a recognition that there's no cavalry coming riding to the rescue, that it's down to us in the places where we are. And there's lots and lots of resources that have been created by the transition movement. There's a great thing called the Essential Guide to Doing Transition, which you'll find on the Transition Network website in about 30-something different languages. That's kind of the best place to start. And we could do a sort of 24-hour lock-in of me just telling stories of great things that have happened, different things in the transition movement. Because I think in lots of ways, it's like people don't have to pay an annual membership to be a transition group, but the commitment is that you share your stories back into the network. So it's like a movement of stories, really, of people trying things out. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work, sometimes they become really amazing, big things. It's been a beautiful thing. And one of the things I love about it, there was a guy called, there's lots of academics do things about transition, a lot of which isn't really very useful. But there was one guy called Luigi Luci, who was a young, brilliant Italian academic who came to Totnes for a year, and he lived there, and he went to everything. Every transition event you went to, Luigi was there putting out the chairs, washing up the teacups, taking notes, really brilliant. And he wrote this book called Everything Gardens that was like his reflections on it. And the best, I remember he said, and it was, as one of the people who started it, there's not many things that I read about transition where I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. I didn't think of that. That's fantastic. And his book is one of the most underlined books I have. And in it, he said that academics like to talk about the transition movement, like it's a thing that you can sort of pin to a table and examine like that. He said the most interesting thing about transition is more the transition moving. Like observing how this thing evolves and changes and morphs over time and absorbs new influences, and that's what's most interesting about it. So there's transition groups in about 50 countries around the world, in thousands of places, and there's quite a few groups in Switzerland. Any transition groups in this evening? Not. There we go. There we go. One over there. So I came here about 4 years ago and did a tour because there was a hub in the Suisse romande area. There was a hub there who were doing brilliant work and doing lots of trainings and supporting the different groups, but they really struggled to find funding. But they still exist. But there's quite a few groups out there because we went to visit them, and some great projects. So yeah, there is some stuff happening here.
Great. So there will be also more time to share some concrete stories. Now I'm interested, and it's a bit the transition to go to this topic of the power of imagination. Your new book is called How to Fall in Love with the Future. And in interviews, you often use the word longing. So what do you mean by that, and why does it matter that we master this ability?
I do a podcast called From What If to What Next. And we did a recent episode with a brilliant woman called Solitaire Townsend, who's an amazing sustainability practitioner. And she's also an expert on Shakespearean theatre. And in the interview, she said the climate movement, in Shakespearean terms, the climate movement has been brilliant at Act 1. We've done a fantastic Act 1. Act 1 is where you set up the tension, who the bad guys are, what's the threat, what's the challenge. We've been fantastic at that. But we just keep going round and round, doing it again and again, louder and louder and louder. She said Act 2 is then where you set off on a journey and you have experiences and you fall in love and the world rises to meet you and you have different things happen to you. We don't really do that bit. So for me, the longing bit came from I saw in 2021 a young woman on a Black Lives Matter protest in America with a t-shirt that said, "I've been to the future, we won." Gave me the most enormous goosebumps. And it was so different at the time from how, like Extinction Rebellion, who I have a lot of love and respect for, how they were talking like about collapse and extinction and we're fucked and all this kind of like narrative, you know, which worked, which is important conversation because maybe they're right. And that's definitely where we're going and we need to change course. But all the people who are going to be brought on board by that kind of messaging are already on board. And it doesn't work for other people. And the way that I love to think about it is by thinking about the moon, right? So in the new book I write about the moon. So in 1865, Jules Verne wrote a book called From the Earth to the Moon. And he wrote this thrilling adventure story where they built a rocket. And a lot of the things in his book were really accurate to what actually happened 100 years later. In his book, the rocket was made of aluminium. It was in different parts. There were 3 astronauts. They took off in Florida. Loads of people came to see the launch. Some of it wasn't quite so accurate because in his book, the rocket was fired out of an enormous cannon. And we know that actually now, if you did that, they would basically be turned into jam as soon as you press the button because of the pressure and everything. But what that book did was it inspired then a whole load of different writers and other engineers to start figuring out how we might do that. So you had then over the next like 50, 60, 70 years, this backwards and forwards between scientists and engineers and storytellers in all the different forms. The first feature film, 1902, by Georges Méliès was called A Trip to the Moon. You had this sort of Popeye went to the moon, Mickey Mouse went to the moon, Tintin went to the moon. You had this whole sort of backwards and forwards between speculative storytelling and engineering and science. In the 1950s, there were 10 films which had the same storyline, which was basically that an all-male crew of astronauts flew to the moon to find it populated entirely by women who hadn't seen men for ages. It was never really made clear how they got there. They got lost somewhere and ended up on the moon. I don't know. But and then there's one that's called Cat Women of the Moon. And it's absolute rubbish. It's on YouTube. I watched it, so you don't have to. Thank you, Rob, very much. You're welcome. And it says on the poster, you've never seen anything like it, which is true. But we were rehearsing. And so it meant that then in 1969, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, Hergé, who did the Tintin cartoons, did this drawing for the New York Times of Neil Armstrong stepping out onto the moon and being greeted by Tintin and his friends with a sign saying, "Welcome to the moon, Mr. Armstrong." Because the storytelling went there first. We'd practiced it. So all big shifts that we make are led first by rehearsals. And when it comes to climate, we don't have 100 years to figure that out. But I think that same principle applies, that we have to move away from just thinking it's enough just to terrify everybody and give people terrifying information. We have to get better at giving people things to run towards rather than just things to run screaming in the opposite direction from. And longing is such a profound human, like, soul ache. It's like, how do we do that? And with that, then, I think, comes the realization that the people in our culture who are good at cultivating longing are not climate activists and are definitely not climate scientists. Climate scientists tend to be like English people on holiday. We just keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, louder and louder, and hoping someone might understand. Doesn't really work. The people in our culture who are brilliant at cultivating longing are artists and writers and street artists and musicians, and we cannot do this without those people. So now a lot of my work is really about how do we do that, because the novelist Don DeLillo in his book Underworld said longing on a large scale is what makes history. Longing on a large scale is what makes history. He didn't say like really depressing films about climate change on a large scale is what makes history. You know, I'm not saying we don't need that stuff. Absolutely we do, because that's where we're at. But at the same time, if we don't talk about the future that we could still create in ways that are seductive and delicious and beautiful, then we're not going to do it.
Thank you. I like this analogy of also the Shakespearean story and all these thoughts about how to make this big shift. I'd like to hear from you or challenge maybe a bit. So this transition, you've called the movement transition, and I'm interested about this Cyril Dion that has realized this movie. He has also He's also a writer and thinker and has published this little manual of contemporary resistance. And in this book, he's describing different social movements and how they reached so-called social tipping points. And in order to have these big shifts, he said that 3 things are necessary. So you need these new narratives, like this vision. So for example, Martin Luther King was I Have a Dream, but also the solutions that come with it. You also need to create these power dynamics and making sure that there are these grassroots movements that build up like power relations, and also doing direct actions and different methodologies in this. And then he says it needs an external crisis. So be it in the past, it was a lot also a war, oil prices, and we see it also nowadays increasing. How do you feel are these different elements articulating, and how could we like combine this creating longing in all the different spheres? And I feel more and more activists, so if we see the Mamdani campaign, but also now in the UK, what happened 2 weeks ago with the Green parties, there have been a lot of like these organizing strategies, like grassroots organizing, that kind of try to go in the direction of understanding the need. I don't know how much there is this creating of longing, but how do you feel we could articulate these strategies, or what is needed to have the good transition like recipe maybe?
Well, I mean, part of the thing of transition being around for 20 years is that there's also a frustration that actually when we published the Transition Handbook in 2008, that book set out very, very clearly that our dependency on fossil fuels represented the most enormous vulnerability. And at that time, we were thinking of that in terms of this concept of peak oil, this idea that the world had kind of reached, it was close to the peak of world oil production, didn't quite go like that way. And also the more you depend on imports of things that you really, really need, the more vulnerable that is. What actually happened from that point onwards was that the European Union spent 18 billion euros a month buying gas from Russia. They could have spent 18 billion euros a month decarbonizing, defossil fueling, is that not really a word, defossil fuelize, anyway, stopping its dependency on fossil fuels during that time. And then when we saw, and I don't think maybe what happened in Ukraine would have happened. You know, actually, we've made, every turn we make the wrong choices. And oil and gas, the thing with oil and gas is, oil and gas is, just drives so much corruption and destruction and you know, if we'd have spent the money that we'd spent on gas, building renewable energy infrastructures across Europe, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now. So there's an element of frustration for me of like, well, what could have been? And it's not like nobody was saying it at the time, because lots of people were saying it at the time. And so now, actually, I think we're kind of back in that space again. You know, the argument right now that dependency on oil and gas represents an enormous vulnerability, and also means that you are making political alliances with the worst kind of people. Like at this point, the link between oil and gas companies and the rise of the far right is very, very concrete. Shell funding anti-trans campaigns in the United States and other places. The oil and gas companies are really the most evil organizations on the earth right now, I would say, with no dramatic embellishment. They fund all the things that are awful, and they're now sort of funding wars. So I think the more that we can do to move away from that, and right now I think in many ways we are in the easiest time that we've been in for maybe 15 years to make those arguments. You look at the city of Liège in Belgium, where they have this amazing project that came through transition, where they're building a food belt around the city. Came out of people in that city in the transition movement saying we need to build a new food system. They have done the most phenomenal work there. They raised 5 million euros of investment from the people of Liège, buying shares in 30 new co-ops that they made. The municipality have invested millions of euros. They produce thousands of school meals every day. They're building this new food structure system around the city, and which I tell everybody about. And 2 years ago, the mayor of Liège made me an honorary citizen of Liège. He said, before this, everyone thought Liège was a bit shit. And you go everywhere telling Liège how amazing it is. You're like an ambassador for Liège. Have a medal. I said, that's very kind. Thank you very much. Can I have my European citizenship back as well, please? He said, oh, that's not in my power, I'm afraid. But the point is, like, that model has already spread to 6 other cities in Belgium. That model right now should be spreading everywhere. Because why would you not build a food belt around your city right now? Why would you not do that? At a time when we see the impacts of climate, we see the precariousness of long supply chains, we see the fragility of all of that stuff. This should be the most urgent thing happening everywhere, decarbonizing, and then, actually then we should be investing in that with a kind of a sort of a joined up thinking. After the Second World War in the UK, when everything was a mess, and there was huge levels of poverty, there was a thing called the Beveridge Report. And the Beveridge Report led to the creation of the NHS, the welfare state, free education, free university education. It was a transformative thing, and over the next 30 years, it lifted millions of people out of poverty. We need a new thing like that right now, which is about recognizing the opportunity that moving away from fossil fuels creates. This should be the biggest creator of jobs anywhere. And we need to be bringing the finance in to make that happen.
Maybe jumping on this, for me, it has been really hard, like the past days and the past weeks, to stay hopeful. I think most of you are seeing what's happening in the world, but not only the environmental climate crisis, but of course also the bombs being dropped in Iran, in Gaza, also the inequality rise, like the far-right ideologies taking more space, etc., you name it. Could you share with us maybe how do you keep hopeful in these moments, and maybe do you have like concrete like insights, tools also that could help us people also engaged in trying to change the world for the better, to stay hopeful and to keep going, and also keep this spark and joy and inspiration to spread, to make sure that people stay or keep having a crush on the future?
That's nice. I like that. I should have called the book that, How to Have a Crush on. I think the first thing, like one of the themes of this evening is about imagination and the need of the role of the radical imagination. I want to be really clear that I think that capacity to have an imagination and to think differently about the future. My favorite definition of the word imagination is that it's the ability to see things as if they could be otherwise. And I think that capacity is something that is absolutely not evenly distributed in the world right now. If you're in Gaza, if you're in Iran, if you're in Lebanon, that's really, really hard. And and I think so those of us here, we have a real privilege. It's a real privilege to be able to think in that way and to have an imagination. And with that comes a real responsibility to use that right now. Because what these times demand of us, I think, is that we have the courage and the strength to be able to fundamentally reimagine everything. Climate change demands that we reimagine everything, and we don't have very long to do it. And this idea that, well, we have to keep doing it like that because we've always done it like that. What's happening in Iran is the worst kind of example of, well, we've always done it like that. It's like men whose imaginations were, I don't know what happened to them, but it's kind of this idea that, I mean, it's just so stupid. But when Gavin Newsom from California was at COP, and all the questions people were asked him were like, but Trump said this, Trump said that. He said, brilliant. He looked right in the camera. He said, Trump is temporary. Trump is temporary, we hope. That actually that administration, we could very easily be seeing a situation where by the end of this year, they're all being impeached. There's all sorts of things going on. This is really like, I remember somebody once talked about Nigel Farage and said, when Nigel Farage opens his mouth, it's like you're hearing the last noise that the dinosaurs made when they saw the meteor coming. It's like that. It's a dying thing, right? The future is not oil and gas and fossil fuels. And the idea that you might now build an economy around that again is like Switzerland saying we're going to build an economic revolution around Betamax video cassettes. It's like, why would you do that? That's like years ago. Why would we be going, like when people talk about coal, it's like, coal? When did anyone even last see any coal? Why would you want to go back? This is ridiculous. So it's like, I think we have to, that when we look at what's happening, it's horrific. And it's profoundly traumatic to see that being done. And I hate how they say, it's a war. It's not a war. It's like somebody with arms this long and someone very small, and that one's hitting that one and the other one can't reach. It's like, it's not an even thing at all. So I think for me, what I try to hold on to is the fact that the stories that we tell about what the future is going to be are really important. And if we just say, oh, well, this is just how it's going to be now forever. It's like, really? Actually, when I look at, like in the UK now with Zach Polanski, we could actually be 3 years away from a government who are going to be profoundly transformative and move away from this idea of austerity. And we're going to invest in the things that need to happen. We can look at the times that we're in as being the end of everything, or we can look at these times as being the beginning of something else that comes next. And it has to be the beginning of something else that comes next. And maybe, I would love to, I guess, for me, when we look at fossil fuels in particular, this sort of despondency that we see on the rise now of like, well, I don't think we can do anything, and maybe it's too late. And it's like, it has cost oil and gas companies a lot of money to create that sense. There are some very smart people. If the transition movement had been given the amount of money that oil and gas companies have given for disinformation campaigns over the last 20 years, we would have done phenomenal stuff. But that's what we're up against. So I think it's like, actually, it's just a story. And my hope is that actually we see this as the sort of flailing last flourish of this sort of patriarchal, extractive nonsense system. Because the new system is emerging everywhere. You can see it. The new economy, the new way of doing things is happening everywhere. Renewables are so much cheaper than fossil fuels now. Why would anybody, already, the beautiful thing I read the other day was that Trump is the president who has presided over the closure of the most coal-fired power stations in the history of America. Not because he decided to, but just because the economics have shifted, regardless of what he decides to do. So I think it's very easy to just say, oh, what's the point? Everything's too horrendous. I'm a father. I have 4 sons. I don't have the luxury of pessimism. We know who the people are who are making this mess, and they do not get to buy my despondency and my despair. The activism that I do is underpinned by a strange mixture of rage, deep fucking rage at who those people are and what they're doing, and also a profound compassion for humanity and a belief that actually I think humanity is great. I think I'm not one of those environmentalists who's like, oh, the world would be better off without human beings. I think human beings are brilliant and I love them and they're better than this. And I would hate for humanity to be the civilization that disappeared, leaving a headstone saying, sorry, we couldn't think of anything else. Like, really? Come on, we're smarter than that.
Thank you, Rob. I think it feels good to me to hear that. Getting quite emotional. Thank you. I think now we've talked a lot about the why, like why we also need imagination, what's going on, and I would like to get us dive into the what before we move to the how we also want to use the app. It's my logic, don't worry about it. So actually, what do you think of a quick time traveling session?
Well, Funnily enough, I've travelled, has my microphone stopped? No, it's okay. Funnily enough, I've travelled all the way from the southwest of England, where you might know Totnes as the place where we created the world's first transition group, first transition project. But what you might not know is that we're also the place where we have developed the world's first actual time machine. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, if I don't win the Nobel Prize this year, I'm going to be really, really disappointed. So our engineers have actually given it to me to bring along. So we're going to do a little, the first act of time travel in the history of Zurich, and you were here. But before I turn it on, you need to have a pair for this next bit. You had a pair before. Just check if your partner is still there. Just check you have a partner for this bit. You good? Everybody has a partner? Okay, so this is a very, very, very powerful quantum device. I might need to stand up so that you can see it at the back. This is, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Hey? You can feel it, right? It's sort of starting to rearrange things on a molecular kind of a level. So I'm going to ask if you might close your eyes, please, and feel the ground underneath your feet. And as you so beautifully said just now, take the deepest breath you've taken all week. And I'd love you to imagine that you are breaking free of what binds you to the present. And you're moving out from 2026 and starting to move forward through time, through 2027, 2028, 2029, you can feel those years going past you like wind on your face. 2030, 2031. These years you're traveling through turned out to be the years of the most astonishing transformation and transition that happened. Nobody could predict it at the time, but you're traveling through times that generations afterwards still celebrate with great songs and great stories. 2032, 2033, 2034, 2035, and we're going to circle now to come and land into 2036. And in a moment, I'll open the door of the time machine so you can go for a walk. And when we do so, we'll take a minute or two in silence while you take a walk around. And do so using all of your senses. What does that future, the future that resulted from us doing everything we could have possibly done, the future that is the source of your longing, a low carbon future with tea that was made whenever we want tea, that is more just, more equal, more fair. What does that world smell like and taste like and feel like as you walk around? We'll open the door. Off you go. And you'll be given a cup of tea as you step out into that world. Take a walk around. So if you keep your eyes closed and turn to your partner, and we'll just take a couple of minutes with them to share. What did you see? What did you feel? What did you smell? How was that? Off you go. Never quite mastered the putting the hand up in the air after I've asked you all to close your eyes. It doesn't quite work. It would be really lovely to hear if anybody has any Just anything you'd like to share that was anything you were surprised by or touched by? What did that future look like to you?
We have. So it's not an amplifier. So I'll just stand next to you. Yes.
Right. So the future I envisioned had all the sort of things you'd predict, green cities and things, but the thing that surprised me the most was that the people that were sent to therapy were the people that hurt people, not the people that are being hurt. And the people that are sent to leadership and creative workshops are the people with the creativity and the imagination.
Lots of things, but what surprised me most was that it was a bit like during Corona, no cars. Yeah. And you could just cross streets, you didn't have to look around, no danger there.
Beautiful, thank you. There was one here, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it was very locally rooted, and I imagine a bit like the food belt that you were talking about. So I imagine the yard where we have really growing a lot of food, and kind of it was very rich with that, like nourishment. It was very local, but very rich and lived, kind of vivid. Yeah.
Yes, maybe one thing that surprised me is that talking to my neighbors, we both felt this slowing down and no car, no plane, and just walking or biking, and it was joyful, and I like that. Yeah.
So thank you so much for doing that. So I was figuring the other day, I think in the last 5 years I've done that activity with about 15,000 people. And what's so interesting to me is no one ever says, Rob, we've got a new IKEA. It's 4 times bigger than the one we used to have. People say it's greener, it's quieter, and there's a woman called Elise Boulding who was doing this as activity very, very, I have to turn it off or dinosaurs start appearing, I think. She did this exercise in the 1990s in men's prisons, something very, very similar to it, and she reported exactly the same thing people told her there. And her in this beautiful report, her conclusion was, I think we have many more co-workers for the work ahead than we might think we do. Like, why don't we start there and work backwards? Rather than start, and I think that this should be a daily practice, like yoga, like meditation, like running, because the reality is doing the opposite of this is a daily practice that we do every day. We wake up, we turn on our phones go, oh my God, really? And we go, oh, and the future disappears and gets cancelled and gets colonized and just disappears out of our lives. And so building that bridge to the future is really important.
Thank you.
So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Maybe a question also for people here in the room that are working in companies, in administrations, NGOs, etc. How can we use this concretely, like this tool, this format? Do you have example of places where you were able to bring all these people at a table and train these muscles collectively? So that would be a question.
Yeah, so I have a training that's called that's based on the book. So it's the How to Fall in Love with the Future training. So normally I do it as a 1-day training. Sometimes I do it twice a year. I do it as a 2-day training in a place called Hawkwood House in the UK. So it's like a 2-day residential immersion in a lot of these tools, which we've done it 4 times. The next one is the 6th to the 8th of July. But I do it as a 1-day training with municipalities, with companies, with community groups, all kinds of different organisations. And there's a place in Wales where one of the 15 national parks in the UK is called the Banau Brycheiniog National Park. Big area, my apologies to any actual Welsh speakers there. And they created, every few years they have to do a management plan for the park. And they wrote this amazing one called The Future, which had letters from the future, photos from the future, postcards from the future. It was this beautifully visionary thing they wrote. And I spoke at a conference in Wales, and the 2 women who wrote that report were there. And then 3 months, and I talked about time machines and time travel, as you might imagine by now. And then 3 months later, they got in touch and said, Rob, we've built a time machine. I said, what do you mean you've built a time machine? They said, well, we got back to the office and we found that a few years ago, we bought an inflatable planetarium because there was because there was funding for inflatable planetariums. I didn't even know they were a thing, but they have. And so they bought this inflatable planetarium and they turned it into a time machine. And so you could show films 360 degrees around. So they made these films, one which was in black and white and which had film of them as if they were in the 1940s, talking about how the park fed itself in those days, cut together with archive footage from the time. They made another film about the present, talking about the system now, and then they bring in kids from local schools who make the film from the future, and then they invite local decision makers to come in and see the whole thing. And they are now passionate advocates that local authorities should be building time machines and should be practicing what in the book I call temporal fluidity, this idea that too often our work, our activism gets stuck in the present. What's it look like if we help people to step into the future, to understand the past, and we become more kind of playful with time? So the book is full of examples of organizations. One also was a school in British Columbia where the head teacher was on a podcast with me talking about imagination and education. And then a year later, he got in touch and said, after that conversation, we redesigned the final year of the curriculum for the oldest kids in the school, and they spent all year in 2040. So they didn't sit and go, what should the future be like? They spent the year in 2040, and then at the end, they hired the biggest hall in their community, and they invited the whole community to come. And people had to walk in down a time tunnel with all these crazy lights. And then they had an exhibition of art from the future, food from the future, theatre from the future. They had all these leaflets that were the organizations started by the students back in the present that had created that, one of which was a ministry of public beauty. That was just beautiful. So it's so interesting. So this, for me, this is work, which is like, when I publish the book, that's not like, that's the end of the investigation. It's like an ongoing thing. And so if you want to follow me on that, I do a newsletter every month called the Time Traveller's Gazette. And if you just go to my website, robhopkins.net, and you put your email address into the email newsletter box, you'll get that every month. And it's like a growing community of practice, of people trying these ideas out in different settings. So hopefully it's a really useful thing to be following.
Thank you for sharing. I actually experienced time traveling, also a workshop I facilitated with the town of Wädenswil and transition town Wädenswil. It's a city very close to Zurich, where it was about rethinking the food system in 2030, and we invited farmers and producers, etc. And I thought, yeah, it will be another workshop of half a day with local citizens, like all these different stakeholders. And what came out of it is indeed, like, first we had a huge, amazing drawing, and this vision with this new mill we had, these new shops, the ice cream that was created by the local cows, etc. It resulted actually in a big project called Ernährungszukunft, so Future of Food in Wädenswil, and that is still continuing and building this alliance. So yeah, I have imagined the power of these methods. It was all based on your guidebook.
The poet Rilke said a beautiful thing. He said, the future must enter into you a long time before it happens. The future must enter into you a long time before it happens. And so for me, these tools are about how do we find the smart ways to do that. And so it's lovely to hear.
I have a last question before I open up the question for the public, because we are at a post-growth fireside chat. I'd like to deep dive a bit in this topic of how a post-growth Switzerland could look like. And maybe to give a bit of a context, at One Planet Lab, we work a lot on this question on how an economy could function within planetary boundaries and respecting also the social needs, the social foundations, the so-called also donut economics that you might know, and we have a donut here, so it fits perfectly
Fireside
well.
donut.
And you're quite an advocate of universal basic income or universal basic services, work time reduction, local currencies, etc. And what is funny is that many of these elements are also elements that we find in debates and literature in the post-growth universe. So what is your vision of the future economy? And do you have a few examples and stories also on this that we should definitely replicate for Switzerland?
I think it's a much more local world. I think it's a much like so a lot more of the things, not everything, but a lot more of the things that we use in our lives come from closer to where we are. So we see food belts being built around the cities. We see also, I think, building material belts being built around our cities. You know, because we realized in 2026, didn't we, that actually 9% of carbon emissions in the world were caused by the use of concrete and cement, and we were running out of sand, and we couldn't keep doing that anymore. So now around Zurich, you know, you see, you know, the production, the turning clay into building materials, the growing of hemp for construction, the sustainable management of forests and timber, straw being produced to make for straw construction stuff. So we see, I think, a whole new industry around everywhere, and a different way that we build. So we build more ecologically, we build these amazing energy efficient homes using those materials. The beautiful thing about things like straw bale building is that about 50% of the workforce is women in that form of construction. So it's a much more inclusive way of building, a much more artistic. We see a kind of return of beauty, I think, in our lives. This idea that beauty is like a luxury, we've kind of done away with that. I think a lot of the places where money was stored, kind of it got freed up. You know, one of the things that we did was in cities like this, we started to analyze where all the money that came in from government went. Where did it all go? And we realized that most of it just left. You know, our cities are like big buckets with holes in, and the money comes every time we shop in the supermarket or on Amazon or pay our energy bills. That money that came into Zurich leaves Zurich again. And so the model, the economy has been remodeled to make as many cycles as possible before it leaves. So we see now in the hospitals, so Sodexo went out of business in 2028 because we didn't need them anymore, because we found better solutions to how to provide food for hospitals and schools, how to provide laundry services for hospitals. All those things now are done as co-ops. And we actually, we moved away from well-being, from economic growth, from GDP as a way of measuring success. This notion that an economy is only doing well if it's larger than it was the previous year is such a weird idea. Like, I have 4 kids. If I have 4 sons, and for a while I wanted them to grow. Growth was great when they were little. If they'd stopped growing, I'd have been kind of worried. And ideally, I wanted them to grow until they were just slightly smaller than me, and then to grow in other ways, to become kinder and wiser and more skilled and all those things. We don't have that expectation for an economy. It's just, is it bigger than it was last year? Great. Is it smaller than it last year? Oh my God, it's a disaster. So I think instead what happens is that we measure different things. We measure things like the number of children playing in the street in Zurich, the number of women able to walk home safely after dark, the number of people with good teeth, you know, the stuff that actually matters to people. And we design the economy around that instead.
I'd love to ask many, many more questions, but I think I also got into a time machine, and it's already later
sorry,
than
I've taken you into the
I
future.
thought.
Yeah.
And I'd like to open up now for 3 to 4 questions, and I'll also come with the mic so we are sure that they can be recorded. Do we have some questions?
Thank you so much, Rob. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I need to be louder, right. I noticed the conspicuous absence of biodiversity, and I just wondered, you know, in a way it's one of the biggest crises that we're facing, and one of the ones that's getting the least attention to fix. Even the projects that are trying to fix it often seem to just see it get worse more slowly. And having big food belts around cities could be in conflict with that. It doesn't have to be. But in Switzerland, what's really interesting is that because land ownership, for example, is so democratic, because generally it's quite a democratic country, there's actually a lot less happening to change the way land use looks. So there's this dichotomy between community ownership and like localizing things and potentially squashing nature even more. I'd be interested to know what you think about that.
Thank you. Okay. So, I mean, of course. So, I mean, we've had like 45 minutes here and whatever now. So I've not been able to go into everything. But yeah, of course, I mean, the climate and ecological emergency, they're two sides of the same thing. You know, during my lifetime, or since the Beatles split up, however you want to look at it, you know, we've lost 70% of the species that we share this planet with, but the word lost is very generous there and is doing an awful lot of lifting. And you know, for me, I when I think about the things that we need to do, it's very much like the return of biodiversity and creating the conditions for the return of biodiversity and building what we need to build instead absolutely go hand in hand. Those two things, you know, I always, one of my favorite things in the whole world is beavers. And beavers, like there is nothing in the temperate world apart from the banning of pesticides and herbicides at scale. But there is nothing in the temperate world that brings back biodiversity like the reintroduction of beavers. And so we have right now a problem across Europe with flooding, and insurance companies, 7% of houses in the UK now are completely uninsurable because of flooding. And but we know we have a solution which allows us to address flooding and be one of the things that leads to a huge increase in terms of biodiversity, and that's the reintroduction of beavers. And in a couple of weeks, I'm doing a training with an insurance company in the UK, and I'm going to say, you should be investing in beavers. You should be funding the rewilding of beavers all over the place, because it's going to save you so much money down at that end, you know. So, but I think, you know, when you look at the food belt, you could, of course, have a food belt which is just a horrific kind of sort of industrial monster around our towns. If you look at from day one in Liège, it was based on a very clear set of principles and values that were established in 2014, which were that it should be sustainable, it should be based on the return of biodiversity, it should be based on community wealth building on that very different kind of model. And that's what they've been building, and that's what they've been doing there. So I think we have to be very clear at the beginning about the principles of what we're doing, but then in that sense, you know, there's a beautiful project in London which is called the London National Park City. Do you know this project? Which was about this idea, this guy who was a geographer who went to visit all the national parks in the UK and came back and did a map of London just showing the green and the blue spaces, which showed that 49.5% of London was green and blue space, which meant if you could make another 0.5%, then London could qualify as being a national park. And so that, which is 1 square metre for every person. So it was this beautiful kind of mental challenge to London. So for me, absolutely this goes hand in hand, really. Yeah. At the very back.
The very back, and I saw also one here. Maybe I'll go that way. Yes.
Thank you. I feel I'm kind of cheating because I'm working at WWF, so I'm asking a question. I'm working in policies, and as we might guess, it's slightly depressing at the moment. And on the upside, we're working on banning pesticides, so that's a good thing. But Switzerland just voted on Sunday against a financing mechanism for funding the transition for more climate-friendly economy. And I read an analysis about this vote just today, and it really struck me because it was kind of telling us if we look into system change science, that we shouldn't waste our energy now in terms of changing national policies because the time is not right for it at the moment. And actually that analysis really called out for us working in maybe specifically in policy, but in these trying to influence politics, actually avoiding the word climate. And I think that might be kind of the tip of the iceberg, but something that I've observed not just in my own work, but also with colleagues across Europe, that we're getting more and more timid also on the NGO side, that we're wondering on how do we address topics in a way that we can kind of get to the majority or what we think the majority is. And I'm just wondering whether you think that's a really shitty idea.
I mean, there was a survey recently that was the biggest last year. That was I think one of the biggest global survey of attitudes towards climate change, which said that 89% of people were really concerned about climate change and that we needed to do more about it. But when they were asked what percentage of people they thought agreed with them, they all said about 40%. So it's a majority of people that have been convinced to believe that they're a minority. And like what I said before, it's cost a lot of oil and gas money to create that illusion. So my natural instinct is to really push against that, and to keep kind of keep doubling on the urgency of that. But then also I think that there are maybe skillful things, like, because there was the referendum a couple of years ago in Geneva, which was, I think, the first place I know of in the world which said that everybody had a right to a good, nutritious diet, which has never happened. Certainly that's never happened in the UK. You know, we have 1 in 4 single mothers regularly go hungry because they can't afford to feed their kids and themselves in the UK. So to have a place that says this is a right is really, really important. I think there are a lot of things that we can do that need to be done, where we maybe don't need to frame it through a climate lens. So, for example, I had an example then, and then it went out of my head. So for example, like if we want to provide, so like the banning of pesticides, there's loads of other arguments for the banning of pesticides without necessarily bringing climate into it. You know, look as more of a public health argument. There's more of an, you know, I love how in the Netherlands they have that argument where the Dutch government invests €500 million every year in the most amazing cycling infrastructure anywhere in Europe, because their calculation is that then saves them €19 billion off the national health bill. That is not an expense. It's an investment in health and well-being. People live 6 months longer than they used to before. So I think we can also be making a lot of those arguments, you know, joining up. There's a lovely campaign in England called the Real Bread campaign, who argue for the health benefits of people eating real fermented bread rather than the crap that you buy in the supermarket. And they had a report of theirs that said, baking is the new Prozac. Which I thought was fantastic. Baking is the new Prozac. It's like, well, in that same way, urban agriculture is the new Prozac. Cycling is the new Prozac. Things that bring people together. There was a beautiful study a while ago when there were a lot more local currencies that talked about how when people went shopping with local currencies, they had 30 conversations with people on average when they did their shopping, whereas if they went with a plastic card, they didn't have any. So when we're faced with an epidemic of loneliness, maybe we should be reframing local currencies as a citywide mental health strategy. Do you know what I mean? It's like, actually at the moment, so something like 40% of young men who get sent to prison were homeless in the 6 months before they got sent to prison. So we make mental health policy over here, we make housing policy over here, we make crime policy over here. We need to be joining all of this stuff up. And actually, you know, or insurance companies investing in beavers will save them a hell of a lot of money. Investing in biodiversity saves planting trees we know that people get better in hospital, heal much faster in hospital when they can see trees out the window. So why don't we have an urban reforestation scheme paid for by insurance companies? Do you know what I mean? So it's about kind of joining those things up. So whether we talk about climate or not, I don't know, but I think we need to be having that kind of holistic thing. What would all be the huge range of benefits that would come from banning pesticides? It would improve kids' performance in schools. So we would need then less. We know that if you invest in the first 5 years of a child's life, give the parents everything they need in order to raise the kids, support, training, some money when they need some money, that you save so much money later down the line. When those kids are failing in school because they haven't got the support they need and all the health problems and everything. So it's maybe a way that we frame it in a more holistic sense.
So Rob, we have our last question here. I'm sorry for that because of time and I don't want to get over time. I hope it's okay, but you will be able to still grab maybe Rob at the end or not. You can grab me. Maybe just one thing regarding this rights for food in Geneva.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great example because based on this, now there are pilot projects enabling like a food fund, for example, where each citizen participating in this pilot receives 150 Swiss francs in vouchers or in a local currency, actually, that they can use only for local biological regenerative food. And this movement is growing a lot in France, but now is also arriving in Switzerland, and we will try to do the first also in Zurich. So if you're interested, 25th of March, you come to me. But I think this was a great base for Switzerland to start these kind of projects. And now I hand over for a question.
Oh, nice. Thank you. So the last question is, are there concrete examples of transition towns that reached a level of stability and even prosperity that manage kind to help fundings other trying to do the same around the world, or if not, why? Yes, please.
So do you mean, are there examples of transition towns that have been so fantastically financially successful that they've been able to bankroll the wider movement? No. I can't think. I mean, actually, there have been places in the UK where there have been transition groups have started community energy companies, which have raised like 15, 16 million pounds of investment from local people, and municipalities investing in them as well. You know, we've had projects in Totnes where we've raised, this project where the community is becoming a housing developer, we raised the money to do those things. But I always remember, many of you will know the idea of ecocide. You know, Polly Higgins and this idea of ecocide. So Polly Higgins was a lawyer in the UK in the 90s early 2000s, who came up with this concept of ecocide, which was the idea that alongside the other crimes against humanity like genocide, we needed a new one called ecocide, which is, there are some places in the world now who are putting that on as a law. But she always saw that as being one side of a coin. And the other side of the coin was something she called the Transition Enabling Act. Because she said that in the Victorian times, so in the early 1800s in the UK, when the canals were being built, there was a Canal Enabling Act, which identified all the blockages to the canals being built really quickly and made legislation to make it much easier. And she said we need a Transition Enabling Act, where we identify all the blockages to this stuff happening really quickly, and we move the legislation so it's much easier to implement renewable energy at scale, at the community scale. Urban agriculture, what are the blockages to that? We'll change that. The return of biodiversity in our cities, what's stopping that from happening? Let's get that out of the way. And we put all that into one thing. And I think the challenge is that at the moment, so much of this stuff is being done with very, very little funding. And each transition group is really trying to raise the resources it needs to transform its own place. The dream would be that some transition groups are so fantastically successful they can bankroll the whole movement. But sadly, I don't know of any that have done that. Maybe if there were some who bought Bitcoin really, really early and who are now able to finance the movement. But I think we were all far too anti-technology to actually do that. Yeah. Would be nice.
Well, we are working on it.
Good, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. I think there are so many pearls and knowledge, and we could continue talking, or I could continue listening to you for hours. Maybe as a closing question, and maybe you can answer in a sentence.
Me?
The challenge.
Okay.
So you've traveled a lot to the future in many different places and spaces in the world. And what would be one advice or call to action or thing that you would like to share with people here in 2026?
I think it would be that the things that you're doing right now that might feel very small and might feel like they're not as effective as you would like them to be, they might feel very marginal, actually turned out to be the seeds of what came next. And actually, people in that future, there's so much gratitude for the work that you were doing in these times when it didn't feel like things were moving very quickly, and you kept going, and you had the tenacity to keep working and keep pushing forward. And it might not feel like anything. It's a bit like Rosa Parks sitting on that bus in the 1950s, alone and scared on our own, and like somebody came from the future and said, do you know, in 10 years, there'll be a Civil Rights Act passed in this country, and it's because you did this right now. People will link it back to you doing this. Thank you. Keep going. And I kind of feel like it's like that now. You know, if people came back through from the future, they would all those things that we can see the seeds, what astronomers would call the weak signals of the future. We can see them all here, and many of you are part of those weak signals. And they built and they built. And people, there's so much gratitude for all that you did in these times.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Let that sink in also afterwards in the apéro. Don't hesitate to look around all these seeds of the future and hope. And I'd like to really thank you a lot again for this conversation, for having taken us on this time capsule for tonight. I think it was, for me at least, it was greatly needed. So I'm really, really grateful. And I'm also very grateful to all the people that have been able to enable this. I'm grateful to my team that is also here. Sandra, maybe you can say hey. And to Richie for the video, to all the tech teams, Clara, Freya, Sasha, to the Christians, to the WWF team, to all of you that have managed to take space tonight to come to this conversation, and many more if I forgot. So I have a bit of a present, actually. Always forget this part. So it's very symbolic, but there is a notebook for you to continue embarking us on your imaginary, visionary, positive
and some blue
futures.
socks.
And some socks that support a campaign, actually, to bring back the salmon in the lakes and rivers of Switzerland. So I think this is also a beautiful image. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.